door creaked open, a sound barely audible over the desperate clanging of a heart about to race straight out of its chest. The dim light flickered as Mike leaned against the wall, breath hitching in his throat. This was it, the moment that determined if they were the smartest robbers or just a couple of fools. It all seemed so simple on paper. They had studied the bank's security, watched its routines, even memorized the shifts of the guards and the cameras that blinked like unblinking eyes. But in reality, the air felt thick with danger. His crew, all hungry for quick cash and the thrill of the chase, echoed his enthusiasm. They were ready to break the law, ready to emerge in the sunlight afterwards, richer and smugger. Excitement buzzed through the air as they stepped further into the dim glow of the bank's interior. But as soon as they entered, the tension of apprehension filled the room, overshadowing their bravado. The vault stood like an ominous titan at the end of the hall, its cold steel gleaming with menace. But Mike had a plan. "I can crack it." His voice had an undeniable confidence. They had gone over this. It was just a matter of timing, right? Minutes later, dread settled in like thick fog. The crew members' whispers echoed in the silence, and the clock ticked louder, reminding them that every moment mattered. Outside, police sirens blared intermittently, the distant wails growing nearer. Mike glanced nervously toward the window. The last thing they needed was a distraction. They knew if they hesitated, their dreams of glory would turn into a nightmare. "Let's go," he insisted, wrestling the tension back into action. They positioned themselves around the vault, ready for what felt like both a heist and an opera, each with its own dramatic performance. But then, from the back of the room, someone shouted, "Wait!" Panic surged through the crew like wildfire. They had forgotten one critical detail, oblivious to those blinking lights that silently relayed their every move to the control room. It hit them hard. They weren't as clever as they thought. They had counted their eggs before they hatched, and now they had ants at the picnic. Someone asked, their cheeks pale. The thrill was replaced by a gut-wrenching fear. They could hear sirens approaching, and the adrenaline that had pumped through their veins just moments before turned into a cold sweat. Mike's mind raced as he racked his brain for solutions. "We can't turn back now," he declared, forcing the group to rally once more, their confidence wobbling like a tightrope walker in the wind. Feeling the pressure, Mike pulled out the toolkits, fumbling under the weight of their growing anxiety. Every click, every missed code entry brought them closer to disaster. They had come this far, the jackpot was within reach. The thrill that had danced on the tips of their fingers darkened into panic, and with it, their thoughts spiraled. A wild plan formed, one that was more reckless than genius. "Listen," he urged them, "if we can't get into the vault, we're busting out." As they darted through the hallways, Mike thought of the lives they were risking, the lives of the people who had come to trust this place with their money, laughter, and dreams. But desperation consumed him. They were young and hungry. They believed in that fateful touch of luck. So what if they weren't criminals? They were adventurers in their own right. But fate had an ironic twist in store for them. As they skittered toward the back door, that door swung wide open. A group of officers, standing with unwavering resolve, greeted them with the promise of cold handcuffs and an end to this foolish escapade. The gang froze, eyes wide, hearts battling against the steel grip of fear. Everything they had prepared for, all the bravado, seemed foolish now. They stood there, paralyzed by the realization that they'd underestimated not just the security measures but their own naivety. Another gang had attempted the same heist hours earlier, and the police had used their lead time to secure the perimeter. It was a miscalculation that made everything perfectly clear. This was not just their unfortunate fate being pronounced. They were the punchline of a joke they never saw coming. "Let's be smart about this," an officer urged, his words slicing through the tension in the air like a hot knife through butter. There was something familiar about the way he spoke, calm, assured, as if he had seen it all before. Underlining his charisma was an undeniable mastery over the very chaos the crew tried to instigate. It suddenly dawned on them. The robbers had thought they were clever, yet they were merely puppets dancing to a puppet master's strings, unaware of the web they'd walked into. Now, as they faced the consequences of choices made in haste, the humiliation stung worse than any threat of punishment. They hadn't just lost the opportunity to accumulate wealth. They had unintentionally endorsed their own downfall. The cops came forward, positioning themselves like chess pieces closing in on a king out of moves. In a small interrogation room later that night, Mike sat alone, his reflection in the glass staring back at him with haunting clarity. How had they miscalculated so drastically? They weren't the only ones wishing for a quick thrill, yet his ambition had spiraled into reckless abandon, leading him straight into a dead end. With every passing moment, he saw clearer the notion of being outsmarted didn't just reside with the law. It lay within him, a cold reality of his own making. Haunting thoughts flooded his mind, looping endlessly like a broken record. He reflected on that group back at the bank, wearing expressions that mirrored each other's confusion. The high they'd ridden only minutes prior crumbled into dust. They had believed themselves to be smart robbers, but none of their so-called plans were anything but a precarious facade. They had banked on luck, thinking that even the gods would favor the bold, but luck was a cruel mistress, and she wasn't smiling that night. As the hours ticked by, his crew was brought in one by one, each facing the same reckoning. Someone dared to whisper, wrestling with stupidity, an ethical crisis spiraling into each of them. No one knew what to say. They were tangled in that web of choices, every thread tethered to another's misfortune. Though they were on opposite sides of the law, Mike felt an unexpected kinship with the officers who had outsmarted him. Each time they spoke, their words alarmingly familiar. They had strategy, foresight, and a collective understanding that reminded him of the very bond he shared with his crew. In that moment, he realized how decisively they had failed to think beyond their excitement. They had a taste of ambition, but lacked the essential ingredient, patience. In a swirl of regret, one thought rose above all others. Wise criminals were never caught, yet they had danced dangerously close to their own demise. As he contemplated the chances he'd opted out of, Mike couldn't help but think about the robberies that hadn't gone wrong, ones he had merely read about, shared in hushed whispers, reluctant admiration woven into tales he derived from textbooks and documentaries. They had believed they were smarter, yet they were outplayed, not just by the officers, but by their own flawed logic. They had convinced themselves they were clever enough to escape unscathed, but every man and woman behind the badge had already studied the game better than they had. Mike understood then how vital it was to have strategy. It wasn't just about wit, it was about knowing where to draw the line. As silence enveloped the interrogation room, Mike sought comfort in the chaos, the realization that sometimes being smart didn't just mean being quick, but having the wisdom to ask the right questions. Why hadn't they thought things through? Why hadn't they made the right connections? If only they had harnessed their passions for something positive, a creative outlet, or a community project. They could have illuminated entire streets instead of shrouding themselves in darkness. Before long, the gamble was lost, a risk that left not a penny in their pockets but a hard lesson etched in their minds. The crushing defeat hung around like an old shroud. While they walked away with nothing, they were gifted awareness, a chance to examine the foolishness that led to their moment of truth. Outside, the night stretched on, and sirens faded into the distance, their echoes serving as reminders of choices unmade. Somewhere real passions resided, uncharted paths waited for the brave, and there in that stillness amidst the ashes of their folly, they discovered something else. The true smartness of life was never in the thrill of the chase but in the courage to seek meaning, not just riches. And although it came at a hefty price, it taught Mike and his crew a lesson they'd never forget. The greatest victory was always in knowing when to outsmart oneself. The clock struck midnight, casting shadows across the empty street. A lone figure stood in the alleyway, eyes darting around like a predator scanning for prey. Nathan felt a thrill, a rush that electrified his veins. He had planned every detail of this heist, from the quiet streets to the guard shifts. This was it, a perfect operation where he and his crew would pull off the impossible. They were ready to make a name for themselves. Deep within the heart of the city, where dreams flickered like neon lights, lay a small jewelry store, known for its exquisite pieces and unconventional hours. Nathan's crew believed they were one step ahead, armed with the confidence of youth and a meticulous plan that they thought would ensure their success. But under that bravado lay a dangerous underestimation of what lay ahead. As they approached the store, Nathan led the way, heart pounding like a drum. "Stay sharp. In and out in 5 minutes," he whispered, the air thick with anticipation. They were all in Zara, who'd always been the quick thinker of the group, Benny, the strong one who could handle whatever came their way, and Mia, the stealthy shadow, capable of slipping in and out like a whisper. The door creaked open, and the faint aroma of polished wood and precious metals greeted them. Inside, the store was dark, save for a few emergency lights casting eerie glows on the display cases. The crew moved swiftly. Nathan found the back door and gently slipped inside, tearing through the chaos that lay in the dark corners of the store. Everything was going according to plan until it wasn't. Just then, out of nowhere, a sound shattered the silence. A sliding bolt clicked, echoing in the stillness. Panic surged through Nathan's chest. He turned to the others, eyes wide with fear. Zara nodded, her expression frozen in disbelief. The back door, their exit route, was now locked, trapping them inside. Nathan felt a trickle of sweat slip down his back. He barked, desperation creeping into his voice. But assessing the situation quickly, he realized they had failed to account for something they couldn't control: sophisticated security systems that now stood in their way like an impenetrable fortress. In the distance, faint sirens echoed throughout the streets, reminding them of the real risks. The tension in the air thickened. The crew now faced the grim reality of their miscalculation, but it was too late. They were inside a confined space, amidst their unyielding ambitions and misplaced confidence. "Let's just grab the goods and go," Benny urged, anxiety causing his voice to quiver. The thought of returning empty-handed was unbearable. Fueled by adrenaline, their sense of invincibility shimmered with reckless desperation. As they raced through the aisles, tossing jewelry into bags, Nathan could almost visualize the luxury that awaited them. But outside those shiny windows, the real world was closing in. Each moment stretched longer than the last, dark whispers of doubt creeping in. Had they really thought this through? Had they really understood what they were facing? "Hey," Mia called out, her eyes darting from case to case. The urgency was palpable as she desperately tried to locate any signs of security. They hadn't expected the store's owner to be tech-savvy, nor did they consider the intricate alarm systems protecting the treasures within. "Focus," Nathan snapped, trying to regain control, his bravado too fragile to break. Time was slipping away while they fought against their mounting fears. A fear of capture, of failure, of chasing a dream that was starting to feel like a nightmare. The sirens were closer now, a cruel reminder of their actions. Just as they fumbled to make sense of the chaos unfolding around them, the unexpected happened. The overhead lights flickered on, flooding the room with brightness. Shadows scattered like dust, illuminating the four of them standing frozen, caught in the act. Nathan's heart dropped. The atmosphere tense, electric with fear and disbelief. And then it was worse than he imagined. A voice boomed from the front of the store, amplified through hidden speakers. "You are being watched. The police are on their way." The declaration hung in the air like a guillotine, slicing through their bravado and leaving only dread in its wake. Panic gripped the crew like a vice. They exchanged looks, wide-eyed and speechless, as the gravity of their situation settled in. The boldness they had felt moments earlier faded into a haunting echo of regret. They'd thought they were clever, outsmarting the guards and the system, yet here they were, trapped in a moment where every piece of the plan had fallen apart. "Stay calm," Nathan insisted, albeit shakily. He turned to look for a way out, desperation creeping through every fiber of his being. They searched every corner, every inch of the store for a possible escape, but it was pointless. Every door, every window was sealed tight, reinforced with security features designed to protect against intruders exactly like them. Chaos had morphed into despair. They had outplayed themselves, caught in their own game. Meanwhile, the reality outside began to sharpen. The sound of footsteps grew louder as police surrounded the block. Officers were alert, ready for action, the shadows of their figures creeping ever closer. It was a scene ripped from a movie, but this was far too real. It felt like a nightmare. An officer shouted booming authority that resonated through the air. They were closing in. Desperation clawed at Nathan's chest. He yelled, voice cracking with fear, the edges of his confidence fraying. Zara urged, her eyes darting around. She was smarter than this, had always been the voice of reason. But reason had become lost somewhere in the chaos. Nathan could feel the shadows of the consequences looming over them. How had they let ambition cloud their judgment? Late-night talks filled with bravado and laughter, each dream carefully sewn together through threads of misguided cunning, had led them to this moment. And it boiled down to one truth. They weren't just robbers. They were ill-prepared players in a game they didn't fully understand. The police were professionals, moving with the precision and authority that comes from experience. They had anticipated this, had seen it all before. Nathan realized they were steps behind, outsmarted at their own game. Mia suddenly said, her voice trembling, "If we stay here, we're done for." The idea hung in the air like a lightning bolt, and Nathan felt torn. What if deviating from the plan only placed them further in danger? Benny shot back. But time was running out. As the sirens blared and managed to drown out all rational discussion, a moment of desperate clarity struck Nathan. If they didn't act, they would be caught, marked, stamped with failure like a broken seal. Risky as it was, it could be their only chance. "Okay, we split up," he decided, voice filled with fierce determination. "Find a way out and regroup past the alley." As fear clutched their hearts, they nodded hesitantly, each weighing the weight of their choices. In that disorienting moment, their loyalty to one another flickered, a hesitation woven with a strand of trust as they edged toward their own paths, uncertainty looming larger than ever. Through the store's aisles, Nathan ducked low, his heart racing, weaving through displays while hurried breaths echoed in his ears. The chaos behind him pushed him further into the dark, a rebellion against the light of reason. He darted toward the back door, no. His heart sunk as he realized it was still locked, the steel frame now taunting him. From the front, he could hear voices, the officers moving closer, their conversations growing louder. He crouched behind a large display case filled with sparkling necklaces, every fiber within him screaming to escape, but the hesitation halted him, the question pulling at his heart. The other three would be facing the same dilemma. Would they make it? Would they have the courage to see this through? As adrenaline soaked his senses, he spotted a side window just large enough to squeeze through. A chance, a glimmering avenue of escape. Pushing through the panic, he clung to the hope of freedom, thirsty for a new chapter beyond the limits of their fouled plans. Pushing the window open, he gripped its edges, the cool metal biting into his palms as he steadied himself for a daring leap. A harsh whisper broke the stillness as he turned back, heart racing. It was Zara, her face pale with anxiety. "They're splitting us up, but don't forget." With that, he leapt through the window, adrenaline coursing through him. Instantly, he felt the cold night air against his face as freedom enveloped him. But in that moment, his excitement collided with the reality of their decision. They had abandoned each other, the threads of trust fraying as they rushed in different directions. On the streets below, he hit the pavement hard, a sharp pain shooting through him, yet he didn't stop. He kept running, ducking into side roads and alleys, the city transforming into a phantom world. Sweat dripped down his forehead, heart pounding like an echo. Around him, the city buzzed in a disconcerting symphony. Each step led him farther from the reckless ambition that had once burned in his chest. Here, in the darkness, he sought solace in the regrettable truths. They thought they'd toyed with fate, but fate had something else planned, a tempest forged by their arrogance. The sirens echoed behind him as he made his quick decisions, splitting his focus between escape and the sense of deep loss for what could have been. Friends and dreams intertwined, unraveled in pursuit of shadows under the weight of their failings. With the adrenaline coursing through him, Nathan finally ducked into a shadowy corner, searching for that security of safety while reflecting back on the risky game they all played. The thrill of adventure had morphed into the terror of consequences. They had underestimated every move, believing themselves smarter than the rules of the game. Stepping deeper into the alley, fear encased him like a blanket, pulling him away from the chaos. But in that moment of solitude, he felt the raw pang of realization. They weren't the only ones who had gambled on that night. They had forfeited more than just the pursuit of wealth. They were giving up their friendships, trust, and the bonds that meant something more than fleeting riches. As dawn broke across the horizon, painting the city in brilliant shades of orange, Nathan began to see things more clearly. He stood there, drenched in sweat and guilt, while the sirens faded into the distance. Their plans had crumbled under the weight of their choices, reminding him of the wisdom that sometimes being smart wasn't about outsmarting others, but about understanding yourself. That day marked a turning point, a lesson learned through reckless ambition. As he contemplated choices made in the heat of the moment, Nathan knew that sometimes the most potent dreams are not those bathed in the spark of thrilling chaos, but those grounded by the virtues of camaraderie, trust, and understanding. And while the cost was high, Nathan would carry that lesson with him far more valuable than diamonds or gold. He had been outplayed, but that single moment of clarity would carve a different path, guiding him toward a future where ambition was tempered by wisdom. In the echoes of defeat, he found the courage to rise anew, not just as a robber but as a person determined to reclaim his life. The sounds of laughter spilled out onto the sidewalk, a mismatched harmony of excitement and mischief. Under the cover of night, a group gathered in a dimly lit corner, their whispers tinged with anticipation. They huddled together, eyes bright and eager, working off the high of adrenaline and newfound ambition. Little did they know, the line between clever and reckless was about to become painfully clear. Jake announced, his voice a mix of bravado and bravado. He was the ringleader, his charisma lighting a spark within the group. They believed in him, each one of them fueled by dreams of quick cash and a little danger. Just across the street stood Sweeney's Jewelry, a small establishment that glittered like a pearl, a tempting target cloaked under a veil of quietude. They'd scouted it for weeks, scrutinizing every move of the sleepy shopkeeper and mapping out the store's security measures like seasoned strategists. No cameras in the back, an alarm that could easily be bypassed. They felt untouchable, like coiled springs ready to leap into action. But tonight's thrill wasn't just about the heist. It was about proving to themselves that they could outsmart the system. One by one, they slipped out into the street, hearts racing with a mixture of fear and excitement. The night embraced them like a shroud as they moved toward the store, shadows weaving among the light. Jake motioned for silence, his eyes scanning the surroundings. Everything felt like a precarious balance, a gripping tension between victory and sheer collapse. "Remember, in and out in 5 minutes," he reminded them. But though his voice was steady, a ripple of doubt flickered beneath his bravado. As they inched closer, it became harder to ignore the soft pulse of anxiety that drummed in the background, warning them that they were tipping into dangerous territory. Inside the store, the ambience shifted. Soft music played, and the sparkle of diamonds and gold shimmered under the faint lighting. The allure was intoxicating. Jake grinned, an adrenaline-fueled smugness coursing through him. Moments later, they split into pairs, moving through the store like phantoms. Mia and Tom headed toward the back, tugging at the bags and facades of the store. Jake and Dave lingered near the front, window shopping in earnest while their hearts raced at the thought of their prize. The sound of a bell chimed quietly as the door opened. They froze, hearts pounding like a drum. A regular customer. No, it was the owner, Mr. Sweeney himself, returning for an unexpected late visit. The crew's plan began to unravel at the edges, the tension building like a coiled spring ready to snap. Whispered Mia, panic slicing through their adrenaline high. They ducked behind the display cases, holding their breath. The dim light illuminated the owner's silver hair as he strolled past them, oblivious to the chaos unfolding around him. Tom whispered, his eyes wide with terror, but Jake, the self-proclaimed mastermind, couldn't let fear dictate their fate. "We'll just wait for him to leave," he said. Patience wore thin and the seconds turned into minutes. The crew watched as Mr. Sweeney chatted on the phone, his back turned to them, laughter punctuating his words. The thought of getting caught sent chills down their spines, stinging with the reality that their plan had gone dangerously awry. Mia murmured, her eyes darting from the man to the exit gleaming like a safe harbor, but Jake's pride wouldn't allow it. Absolutely not. Finally, as the owner walked away to the back of the store, Jake seized the moment. "Let's go." The group sprang into action, adrenaline driving them forward as they hurried toward the back, hope igniting in their hearts again. They slid into the dark room where vintage jewelry sparkled under glass. The glimmering treasures enchanted them momentarily until reality pierced through like a knife. The back door sat ominously closed, locked tight. Their plans had not only begun to crumble, it was becoming clear that they were swiftly running out of time. Tom scolded, peering frantically at the door. Jake merely shrugged, uncertainty carving deep lines across his brow. "Just cover me," he urged, kneeling at the door to examine the lock mechanism. Outside, the unmistakable sound of sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer with every heartbeat. Desperation clawed at their chests, and time slipped as they struggled against mounting fear. The weight of their choices felt suffocating, and regret began to seep into their minds like poison. "Okay, it's locked," Jake finally admitted, pulse racing. His confidence wavered, and the flames of panic consumed the group. They were trapped, cornered like mice in a maze with no exit in sight. Just then, a lightning flash of an idea struck Mia. She exclaimed, pointing toward the glass pane that overlooked the alley. Tom protested, but the urgency fused with desperation, and Jake stepped forward. Before they could change their minds, they hurried to the window, heartbeats synchronized with panic. The glass glimmered with temptation a way out. But as Jake raised his fist, a sudden sound erupted from the front of the store. Dave gasped, his voice barely a whisper. Instinctively, they stumbled back, hearts in their throats. The door swung open, and police officers spilled inside, commanding the room with commanding authority. The crew froze, terror coursing through their veins like ice. The situation unfolded exactly as they hadn't hoped. They had grossly underestimated the speed at which the police would respond, believing they could evade capture. The reality hit them like a freight train, a veiled confidence crushed under the weight of consequence. Jake's bravado vanished. He shouted, the urgency making them all about, but their attempts to scramble were futile. The officers quickly surrounded them, eyes sharp and focused, ready to apprehend every one of them. Another officer commanded, the sternness in his voice radiating authority. The flashing lights from outside pierced through the store, creating a haunting spectacle that brought their dreams crashing down. Desperation morphed into panic as reality set in. The plan had unraveled, and they hadn't outsmarted anyone. The adrenaline that once fueled their bravado transformed into a chilling realization that instincts and ambitions had led them astray. Caught in the chaos, Mia felt a wave of sorrow wash over her. She choked, overwhelmed by the repercussions of their folly. Jake hung his head, the weight of regret crushing him. They had acted impulsively, confident in their ability to bend the rules at their whim. Now, as they were handcuffed and led outside, the truth was glaringly clear. They had failed to account for a crucial variable, the law. Sitting in the back of the police cruiser, the air felt heavy with unsaid words. As the sirens blared and the world outside rushed by, the crew found themselves trapped in their own thoughts. Tom lamented, the flicker of hope extinguished like a flame in the wind. The conversations filled the car, straining against the cold reality that enveloped them. They had stepped too far into the realm of danger, and now there was no escape, no guttered path to retreat. And in that instant, Jake felt the sting of remorse pierce through him. They had thought they were smarter than everyone else, but instead, they had underestimated the power of consequences. They had outplayed themselves in a game far bigger than any heist of their dreams. Jake's mind swirled in a tempest of reflection, thoughts spiraling back to a night filled with bravado that turned into despair. It wasn't just about the robbery, it was about what they had lost in pursuit of something foolish, a camaraderie that had been forged in excitement, now dissolving in regret. As they sat there in silence, their fate sealed, the city lights flickered like stars against the dark canvas of the night, a constant reminder that they had been outsmarted not just by the police, but by their own reckless ambition. In the coming days, they would face the consequences of their mistakes, standing before a judge who would deal with them harshly. But in the quiet solitude of their hearts, they carried an understanding that would linger far beyond those moments, wisdom gleaned under the weight of their vanity. Sometimes being smart isn't overcoming the system, but rather recognizing the power of patience, humility, and the wisdom that comes from knowing when to walk away. They had gambled with their futures and lost. And in that stark reality, they found a bittersweet lesson wrapped inside every unfulfilled dream, the price that ambition can demand when it's tied to folly. As they emerged from that chapter in their lives, one thing became clear: they were forever changed. With each passing day of their sentence, they began to see the value in a life built on trust and integrity, far more precious than any gem locked behind glass. And sometimes, the hardest lessons are the ones that teach you how to truly live. The night felt electric, charged with the thrill of possibility. Beneath a blanket of stars, 4 figures stood in the darkened alley, nerves humming. They had spent months dreaming, planning, deciding that tonight would be their night. The heist of a lifetime, one so calculated that it was bound to succeed, or so they believed. Jake whispered, his voice tremulous with excitement and a hint of fear. He was the ringleader, fueled by dreams of wealth, and this time he was confident in their plan. All they had to do was break into the Golden Orb, a small yet exclusive jewelry store tucked between bustling cafes. An unassuming facade that masked the treasures within. The other 3, Mia, the tech whiz, Dave, the muscle, and Sam, the lookout, tightened their gear, hearts pounding in rhythm to the exhilaration of the moment. They had discussed every detail, surged with adrenaline at their supposed cleverness. They believed they had outsmarted the odds. With one last nod, they slipped into the darkness, creeping toward the store. The cool night air wrapped around them as they approached the side entrance, the thrill of danger buzzing in their veins. Only a few steps more and they would be in. They would become legends in their own right, the ones who pulled off the impossible. But as they huddled near the door, reality set in. "Wait," Mia whispered, her voice laced with uncertainty. Jake brushed aside the doubt. "We figured everything out." Confidence surged in his chest, though internally an inkling of apprehension nudged at him. Nevertheless, he waved Mia's concerns away. They had come too far to back out now. With bated breath, Jake pushed the door open, its creaking sound echoing in the stillness. They slipped inside, heartbeats synchronized in a silent countdown, feeling invincible, like characters in a movie about to take down the villain. Once inside, the soft glow from beautiful display cases illuminated their path. Diamonds sparkled like stars, and gold glimmered in everything but the murky shadows swirling in the corners. The scent of polished wood and expensive perfumes hung heavily in the air. Jake's adrenaline surged as he moved toward the back, where he had convinced himself the grand prize awaited the vault. "All right, we split up. Mia, find the security system. Dave, you're with me," Jake ordered, brimming with an authority that felt right. Sam took his station by the front, eyes on the door. They unleashed their plans, enthused by the idea of seizing the night. The thrill shot through Jake's veins as he and Dave approached the vault door, a sleek steel behemoth standing between them and their fortune. "This is it," Jake murmured, his voice filled with awe. Meanwhile, Mia crept toward the back room, making sure to remain alert. She rummaged through drawers, searching for the main control panel. This was her moment to shine, and she relished the pressure, fueled by the growing excitement coursing through the air. But then a chill ran down her spine as she stumbled upon something she hadn't expected. The alarm system was not just wired but digitally advanced beyond anything she had seen before. Anxiety crawled into her chest like a creeping vine. "Guys, we have a problem," she called out, voice quivering against the festering tension in the room. Jake and Dave exchanged worried glances as they rushed towards her. Jake demanded, his hands twitching with anticipation. "The alarm has motion sensors. The moment we make a wrong move, it'll set off an alert." She replied urgently, her mind racing. The weight of her discovery pressed upon them like lead, and for the first time, doubt threatened to seep into their confident facade. But Jake, unwilling to back down, insisted, "We can handle it. We've come this far." He was a man consumed by ambition, caught in the web of his own confidence, and he felt as if he couldn't lose. Hours later, or so it felt, Jake finally managed to crack the intricate lock on the vault, muscles tense with anticipation. Each twist felt monumental, painstakingly slow as the drums of his ambition played louder in his chest. Even the silence felt operatic, a crescendo to what they believed was victory. The lock clicked open, releasing a sound like applause in their minds. With bated breath, he swung open the heavy door. Inside, the dazzling chandeliers of jewels caught the light, casting reflections around the room like constellations. The crew gasped, breath hitching in awe. But just as quickly as joy surged through them, a new tension buzzed beneath the surface. A feeling that perhaps this moment had come too easily. Jake urged, shaking off the fleeting doubts. They rushed inside, their bags ready to fill with riches. In their frenzy, no one noticed how Mia's hands trembled as she entered. The high felt intoxicating, but as they filled their bags, a noise echoed through the still air, a low ping that unfurled dread in their hearts. The fearful whisper of an alarm rang out deep in the recesses of the store. Dave asked, dread washing over his face. In a haze, Mia felt time slow. No, it can't be. I thought, but before she could finish, the soft glow of emergency lights flickered ominously above them. We've triggered something, she exclaimed, panic igniting in her chest. Frantic energy shot through their veins as their minds raced. Jake scoffed at the earlier doubts and pushed back. Stay calm, this is just a precaution. But they had already lost the luxury of control. Sirens blared in the distance, growing closer, a mocking chorus resonating around them. Come on. Sam's voice broke through, urgency blending with fear as he ushered them back toward the entrance. The thrill of adventure had devolved into a suffocating panic. But as they stormed toward the front, barriers bloomed in their path. The emergency exit was locked tight. Jake's anger surged. He yelled, frustration spilling forth. Mia shouted, her heart racing. The shimmering treasure they had coveted slipped further away as reality crashed hard against their fragile ambitions. Desperation settled over them like a dark cloud. The realization hit. They weren't just robbers. They were now cornered and outsmarted, the game played against them. Window. Mia shouted, pointing toward a small, barred window that glimmered. As they rushed to it, the sound of footsteps outside grew louder, shaking their resolve. Jake could hear the approaching officers through the glass, the rhythmic clatter of boots, the buzz of radios. It was a scene scripted in horror. They were truly trapped, their fate sealed by their hubris. In that moment, adrenaline-fueled fear made it hard to think. Jake scanned the room desperately, but panic clouded his mind and lower instincts took over. He yelled, his mind racing for options. Mia pleaded, urgency gripping her voice. But Jake, engulfed in resistance, pressed ahead. They were running out of choices, and he would not let fear dictate their fate. With a primal scream, he threw his shoulder against the window, shattering it into a million pieces. The sound pierced the air, sending shards spiraling into a cascade of glittering destruction. Cut by fear and adrenaline, Jake urged them forward through the jagged shards. Finally, they emerged into the cool night air, panic surging through their veins. But their moment of triumph was short-lived. As they stumbled away from the store, the world around them transformed. Flashing lights erupted, painting their faces in shades of blue and red. A commanding voice boomed, cutting through the chaos. The crew halted, fear coursing through them now like ice water. They had precipitated their own downfall, ensnared in a trap they had woven with reckless ambition. The uniforms surrounded them, resolute and steady, a stark contrast to the pandemonium in Jake's chest. In that moment, the reality of their failure washed over each of them, filling the air with thick silence. As the officers moved in, Jake could feel the weight of consequence enveloping him. They had believed they were smarter, outsmarting a system that demanded respect. The truth was far simpler. The bravado that had carried them forward had led them straight into the hands of the law. Each step felt like a fading echo of dreams, hopes pinned to riches that now lay shattered in both their pockets and their minds. The officer asked, disappointment mingling with disbelief. Their earlier confidence, vibrant and defiant, had dissolved into a haunting surrender. But beyond the adrenaline in that painful moment, the corners of Jake's mind unfurled flickers of insight. Their mistake hadn't been the heist itself. It had lied in their hubris. The belief that being clever was enough, that they could succeed without fully grasping the intricacies of their reality. As they were led away, resentment and anguish surged through Jake. They thought they were equipped for greatness, but in reality, They were naive players in a game far more significant than themselves. After the dust settled and the officers summoned reinforcements, the delusions of grandeur began to fade. Sent for interrogation, they sat in a sterile room where every second felt like a lifetime. The quiet tension hung thick in the air, heavy with the inevitability of their choices. In the end, they could have taken a different path. Unlike the fantasy of outsmarting everyone, the lessons they learned cut deeper than any price they'd sought to claim. They realized that ambition without foresight is a shaky foundation, and in their struggles, they discovered the truth, that sometimes the real wisdom isn't just about being smart, but knowing when to stop before venturing into darkness. Sitting there, wrapped in a cocoon of regrets, they began to see ambition cloaked in a newfound light. They would pay the price for their recklessness, but in that lingering feeling of sorrow, they understood that life was rich with possibilities beyond quick wealth dreams waiting to blossom if only they chose wisely. And so, as they stared into their own reflections, it dawned on them. They had not just lost a heist. They had lost their chance at a future that reached beyond fleeting thrills. The lesson would remain carved in their hearts, one that whispered with the echo of their failures: look before you leap. For sometimes the biggest risk is underestimating the wisdom of life itself. The night felt impossibly still, a quiet lull that betrayed the chaos about to unfold. In the shadows of a silent street stood a dilapidated warehouse, the perfect hiding spot for four men huddled together, plotting their audacious escape into wealth. The flickering moonlight barely illuminated their faces, but their eyes shone bright with ambition and reckless confidence. "Tonight's the night," Victor proclaimed, his voice filled with bravado, like a magician about to reveal his greatest trick. The thrill was palpable. You could feel the adrenaline crackle in the air, mingling with the scent of diesel from nearby trucks. It was a fitting name for a group who believed they could avoid detection, slipping in and out of the shadows without a trace. For weeks they had case-studied their target, a high-end electronics store filled with gadgets that could fetch thousands on the black market. Security cameras, alarms, and guard shifts, each detail meticulously mapped out, every achievable weakness identified. "Here's the plan," Victor said, unfurling a rough sketch of the store on the dirty floor, his fingers racing along the lines. "We go in through the back where the security feeds are weak, in and out in 10 minutes flat." The others, Tommy J and Kyle, nodded eagerly. They hung onto Victor's every word, intoxicated by the allure of easy money. But as the plans rolled out, a subtle, unspoken fear lingered in the back of their minds, threatening to undermine their exuberance. Kyle asked hesitantly, his voice barely above a whisper. Victor shot him a glare. "Of course it can. You just need to trust the plan." With a mix of anxiety and excitement, they gathered their gear, gloves, masks, and the crowbars that would become their tools of liberation. As they hatched their final strategies, it was easy to overlook the thin line between ambition and folly. They stood tall, cloaked in the illusion of invincibility, believing there was no way they could fail. As they approached the store, their hearts raced. The glow of neon signs illuminated the dim alleyway, casting long shadows around them. Victor led the charge, his footsteps echoing as they reached the back entrance. Tommy fumbled with the lock, sweat glistening on his forehead, the weight of anticipation heavy on his shoulders. "Just a little more," he muttered, pushing against the stubborn lock with all his strength. The seconds felt like an eternity, but the door finally creaked open. Inside, darkness enveloped them, but the scent of electronics and polished surfaces felt like the promise of success. They switched on their flashlights, beams cutting through the gloom. An array of shiny devices lay before them, waiting to be claimed. The excitement surged, but so did the tension in the air. "We need to stick to the plan," Victor reminded them, his voice steady but hushed. In and out. They moved like a well-rehearsed dance, gliding quietly through aisles, eyes like hawks on the prize. Phones high in demand, the latest gaming consoles and expensive laptops, each item radiated opportunity. But even as they stole glances at their treasures ahead, a gnawing doubt slid into the corners of their minds. The nervous energy was palpable, transforming their excitement into an unsettling whisper, a subtle reminder that they might not be as clever as they thought. Jay asked, his voice carrying an edge of panic. "Stop worrying," Victor replied, his tone hardening. He pushed onward, their resolve buoyed by hope and the promise of freedom. All the while, they overlooked the subtle signs of what was to come, the slightly flickering security lights, the eerie silence that accompanied their actions. Just as they reached a rack stocked with high-end headphones, a loud, piercing beeping shattered the quiet, a siren announcing their presence. It erupted like a bomb, echoing in the hollow aisles. Panic ignited, and in an instant, everything unraveled. Kyle shouted, his voice trembling. The crew turned to Victor, who stood frozen, the weight of his arrogance crashing down around him. He yelled, but as they raced toward the exit, heavy footsteps thundered from all directions. The police blockade was set. Their carefully crafted illusion of stealth had imploded before them. Frantic, heartbeats pounding like a war drum, they barreled toward the back door, minds racing for any semblance of escape. But the exit loomed like a wall, locked and ominous. The world outside felt like an unreachable desert, each moment slipping away like sand through their fingers. "Go, go." Victor screamed, desperation fueling their frantic attempts. As they scrambled toward a window just above them, hope flickered. Tommy yelled, pushing against the glass. It shifted slightly but wouldn't break. They were trapped in a moment that felt like molten metal, cooking them from the inside out. "Use the crowbar," Victor urged as their surroundings began to cascade into chaos. It was a race against time, against fate. "Wait." Mia, a nearby employee who had just arrived for an early shift, protested, fear flashing in her eyes as she watched the scene unfold. She had stumbled upon their commotion, unease urging her to retreat. Facing the uncertainty, Tommy shattered the window with raw panic. Glass exploded outward in a shower of tiny diamonds, reflecting the panic in their eyes. They scrambled over the jagged edges, adrenaline coursing through their veins. The promise and peril of freedom loomed just outside. But as they hit the ground, a fresh wave of dread washed over them. Red and blue lights danced across the brick walls, a visual reminder of their folly. They were outplayed not just by security systems, but by their own overconfidence. Victor hollered, leading the charge into a narrow alley. Each step felt heavy as the night air became stifling, filled with the weight of their consequences. Heartbeats thundered in their ears, and the closer they got to the street, the louder the sirens blared. "Turn left," Jay shouted, his mind working tirelessly to calculate their escape route. They weaved through the labyrinth of back streets, shadows closing in around them, uncertainty swirling like a tempest. But fear had a way of clouding judgment, and as they slipped through alleyways, the others failed to notice that Victor had taken separate directions. Tommy yelled, confusion flooding his voice. Victor shouted back, confidence blurring into reckless abandon. He darted down an alley, fully convinced he could outsmart everyone. But moments later, as he rounded the corner, he came face to face with an officer, their eyes locking in a moment of realization. The choice was stark fight or flight, but he chose flight, desperately scrambling back into the tangled streets. The crew had once moved as a unit, but with Victor deviating, chaos erupted. They became disoriented, each one frantically searching for an exit through the mounting fog of their mistakes. In a nearby park, they came together, breathless and trembling. Kyle asked, panicked. The clock was ticking louder, urging them to come to terms with their reality. Jay snapped. As they fled deeper into the night, the dark air thickened with their fear. They had once believed themselves invincible, but now they were three frightened souls fleeing from their own ambitions. The weight of their actions settled heavily on their shoulders. What they thought was a clever plan had transformed into an unsolvable puzzle. In moments of near silence, they could hear the shouts of law enforcement behind them. As the minutes ticked away and their hopes began to shatter, dread manifested into a palpable force. "Look, we need to split up," Jay proposed, anxiety clouding his voice. "If we all get caught together," Tommy countered, desperation thick in his throat. But it was a decision they had to make, for survival outweighed loyalty at that very moment. They exchanged glances filled with uncertainty, but as the sirens grew nearer, a grim understanding settled between them. "All right, we'll meet at the rendezvous point by sunrise." "Stay safe," Jay said, resolve setting in but worry etched deep into his features. As they split into the night, an underlying thread of fear connected them. Each step echoed the mistakes made, trust twisted into trepidation. With every hurried breath, Victor felt the walls closing in around him. His confidence, once intoxicating, now felt like chains that bound him. The weight of decision crept up inside him, a realization that ambition without wisdom was folly. His heart raced as he darted through alleyways, the specter of police lurking ever closer. In the shadows, he thought of his crew, what had become of them while he strove to evade capture. The thrill of adventure had shifted dramatically into a road paved with regret. As dawn began to break, the streets glowed with the soft light of a new day. He found a hiding spot, crouching behind abandoned crates as he tried to catch his breath. The adrenaline felt wild, an echo of the bravado that had once surged through him. In that quiet moment of reflection, it became painfully clear to him. They had been outplayed. The very confidence that had driven them to this point had rooted itself deep in their downfall. They had believed themselves too clever, too street-smart. Yet here they were, ensnared by their own ambition, lost not just physically but fundamentally in every decision they had made. The thrill of their escapades had morphed into a lesson etched across their minds, an emotional scar that would forever remind them of their reckless pursuit. Around noon, the streets bustled with life, and the sun beamed down upon the city. Victor found his way back to the warehouse, where he and the others had planned to regroup. As he entered the dilapidated building, a chilling silence filled the air. Tommy and Jay had already arrived, their faces ashen with defeat and fear. Jay questioned, guilt weighing heavily in the air. Victor snapped, the weight of their circumstances pressing down on him. Each moment in the warehouse felt like a ticking time bomb, memories of their folly echoing with every breath. Tommy asked, the vulnerability in his voice revealing their shared anxiety. "We can't go back." Victor stepped back, overwhelmed by regret. This wasn't the adventure they had envisioned, it was a disaster from the very start. He suggested almost hesitantly, the proposal breaking the silence like glass. Tommy exclaimed. But deep down, Victor felt he needed to confront their choices, a chance to reclaim their sense of agency rather than live in fear of being hunted. They were not criminals by nature, but misguided souls chasing folly. As the sun set, casting long shadows on the warehouse walls, they gathered their resolve. In that moment, they realized they needed to face the uncertainty together, not just as a phantom crew lost in ambition, but as people willing to take responsibility for their recklessness. With heavy hearts, they stepped into the fading light, the echo of sirens fading into the background. They were no longer just robbers in a dangerous game of chance. They were individuals who had confronted their mistakes and were ready to reshape their futures. In the end, as they faced the consequences ahead, they carried with them a knowing that ambition wasn't just about bold dreams, but also about learning from our failures, transforming that loss into growth, and choosing the path of redemption. Sometimes, true bravery lies not in escaping the consequences, but in facing them head-on, turning life's darkest moments into lessons shining like stars in the night. The night was thick with tension, a city blanketed in silence, save for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional bark of a stray dog. In an alley hidden from the streetlights, 4 men gathered, their breath visible in the cold air. They huddled together, scheming in low voices, excitement crackling between them like static electricity. This was it, the night they would pull off the heist of a lifetime. "Tonight, we're hitting Langston's Jewelers," Jake said, his voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of nervous energy. He was the orchestrator of this whole operation, a self-proclaimed genius who had meticulously crafted every detail of their plan. On the surface, the plan seemed flawless. They had scoped out the jewelry store for weeks, watching the guards, memorizing the schedules, even timing the shifts of the blinking security cameras. They believed they had it all figured out, every possible obstacle accounted for. Yet beneath that bravado lay a flicker of doubt among the crew, worry that maybe, just maybe, they weren't as clever as they thought. Kyle asked, his voice wavering slightly. Jake snapped, "We're smarter than those guys." They exchanged glances, the undercurrent of nervousness washing over them, yet they nodded. After all, they trusted Jake. He had a way of convincing them that they were invincible. As they approached the store, the neon lights of Langston's glimmered against the dark, drawing them in like moths to a flame. The jewels inside sparkled enticingly, promising wealth and luxury. Nothing felt impossible now. The adrenaline coursed through their veins. They were poised, ready for action, high on the thrill of doing something big. Jake pulled out a crowbar and motioned for Tommy to follow him. "You'll take the back entrance." The others nodded, but doubt danced in their minds. They crammed into their masks, shadows cloaked by darkness. The plan was in motion and there was no turning back. With a cast of determination, Tommy slipped into the narrow side alley while the others waited anxiously. A chill crept through the air as he approached the back window. It was a perfect fit for him, and as he edged closer, sparks of excitement ignited within him. But then something felt off. He noticed a light flickering above. "Just focus," he whispered to himself. He crouched down and pushed against the window. It rattled, clanged, and suddenly, with a loud crash, it burst open. Tommy dropped inside, heart racing, the scent of fresh varnished wood surrounding him. Inside, the store was quiet. He clicked on his flashlight, illuminating displays of sparkling diamonds and gold chains. It was everything they had imagined and more, but just as quickly as the thrill surged, fear swept in. "Hey, guys," he whispered into the radio, but static buzzed back. No one could hear him. Rushing back to the team, the others waited just outside, adrenaline peaking as they anticipated his next move. When Tommy didn't reappear immediately, a gnawing fear started to crawl at Jake's fingertips. "Tommy." Seconds passed like hours before Tommy finally emerged. He murmured, and they squeezed into the store, slipping into the shadows of the jewel-encrusted world. Inside, time slowed down as they moved through the aisles, eyes scanning the glittering prizes. Jake's anticipation morphed into urgency as they gathered items into their bags, rings, watches, and pendants, each one representing wealth beyond their wildest dreams. But just as they were piling their loot, a sudden sound pierced through the silence, a soft, alarming beat. The group froze, exchanging wide-eyed looks. Kyle's voice trembled and Jake's confidence wavered as the beeping intensified. "I don't know," he whispered, but panic was spreading like wildfire. As they scrambled to finish stuffing their bags, the beeping turned into an echoed alarm, a harsh siren wailing its way through their minds. Jake shouted, and they bolted toward the back exit, hearts pounding like drums. The thrill of success had morphed into a frantic race for survival, the stakes skyrocketing into chaos. Fueled by adrenaline, they barreled through the store, but the exit was already blocked. A security guard stood there, eyes wide in shock. The crew skidded to a halt, panic breaking through every semblance of control. "Back!" Tommy yelled, but there was no way out. The alarms rang louder, assaulting their senses with an uninhibited fury. With nowhere left to run, they turned to see a wall of flashing lights leaping toward them from the street. Desperate, they dashed toward the front, seeking any means of escape. The tension was palpable as they encountered rows of display cases that interlocked like a fortress, and time morphed into an ominous countdown. Jake shouted, "No," Kyle protested. But Jake, frantic and cornered like a wild animal, had lost the grip on reason. With one swift move, he smashed the closest display, sending glass cascading like shrapnel. The sound echoed throughout the store, time freezing in that split second, and with it the illusion of control shattered. In panic, they spilled out of the side exit that Tommy had used earlier, but the world beyond was transformed. Sirens blared, lights flashed, and the street was awash with colors that mocked their failure. "Split up," Jake ordered, his voice slicing through the chaos. Each man darted in different directions down alleys, hearts pounding like war drums as the consequences of their actions began to dance around them. But as they ran, doubt crept into Jake's mind. Had they actually thought they could outsmart the system? Had they imagined themselves too clever to fail, too smart to get caught? The sirens were growing closer, a reminder of their hubris. With each corner they turned, the weight of their choices began to drop like lead in their chests. Fear morphed into a primal instinct, pushing each of them in varied directions, solitary islands of chaos fighting against the tide of consequence. Victor ducked into a nearby side street, heart racing, but in his disorientation, he failed to notice a police officer lurking just behind the corner. Their eyes locked in that instant. A collision of ambitions turned sour. The officer called out, his voice steady and firm, slicing through the adrenaline like a knife through butter. Panicking, Victor turned to flee, but it was too late. The officer tackled him to the ground, heavy with the weight of truth. There was no escape for him, no outsmarting the law. Just like that, the gang was falling apart, each man trapped in their own turmoil, separated by choices made in haste. Nearby, Kyle had found a moment to catch his breath in a hidden alcove. The adrenaline began to wane, and the realization of failure chilled him to the bone. He squeezed his eyes shut, imagining how his life had spiraled out of control in just a few moments. Would his mother ever understand? As he attempted to plan his next move, he saw headlights through the gap in the alley. The fear bloomed anew, a tide pulling him into despair. Meanwhile, Tommy found himself lurking behind an abandoned storefront, terrified yet calculated. His breath came in harsh bursts as he scoured the streets for any sight of his friends. They had moved through those alleyways as if they were invisible, but now they were visible in every sense, an open wound festering with consequences. He whispered to himself, horror coating his thoughts like frost on glass. The thrill of their recklessness had turned quickly into an urgent desperation for freedom. Back at the scene of the original store, Jay felt the weight of defeat settle over him like a heavy fog. He had only managed to duck into a nearby diner, heart racing, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. He watched from a window as police cars swarmed the area, lights flashing, detouring his dreams before they even had a chance to blossom. With each minute that ticked by, a deep-seated realization clawed its way to the forefront of his mind. They weren't just in trouble. They had underestimated their ambitions, believing they could bend the rules without consequences. They were being outplayed, not just by the authorities but by themselves. In that diner, he heard the murmurs of muffled conversations around him, yet their words blurred into a sea of noise, the buzz of reality crashing over him relentlessly. He could feel the weight of every decision weighing him down, anchoring him in the consequences of their choices. As the sirens dulled into the distance, Jake sat handcuffed in the back of a police cruiser, his heart heavy with shame. The streets outside raced by, the normalcy of life going on without a care. But for him, everything had changed. Dreams of grandeur felt like poison seeping into his mind. In the end, it would be the vulnerability he felt, not just in being caught, but in the sheer realization that their very ambition had led to this pitiful moment. They had imagined themselves smarter, outsmarting the odds, but they had failed to see the clarity rooted in honesty. He muttered, eyes fixed on the dark stretch of road. All four men, now scattered through the streets and back alleys of the city, faced their own reflections, a tapestry woven with threads of regret. Unbeknownst to each other, they began to grapple with the identity of who they were versus who they thought they could be. The false bravado of youth, full of daring, had morphed into sobering reality. It wouldn't be long before each of them would have to face the trial, not just of law, but of self. The choices they made echoed through the very fabric of their existence, stitching together a narrative far deeper than a simple robbery gone wrong. As they grappled with their new reality, an important lesson enveloped them. Life isn't about outsmarting everyone else. It's about being smart enough to recognize that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. They found themselves forever altered, standing on the precipice of consequence, ready to confront the shadows of their ambition and the light of truth waiting just beyond the darkness. The clock struck midnight, its chime echoing ominously through the quiet streets. In the shadow of an unassuming bank, four figures crouched behind a dumpster, their breaths coming in rapid, shallow bursts. Each one of them was plagued by a cocktail of anxiety and exhilaration as they waited for the perfect moment to spring into action. Liz whispered, her eyes darting nervously. The streetlights cast a dim glow, illuminating the planned chaos, but her gut twisted with doubt. "Trust me, Liz," Danny replied, his voice smooth like syrup, masking the fear that lurked beneath. "We've been planning this for weeks. We know every detail." The group nodded, fueled by a collective ambition that felt intoxicating. They watched the bank, eyes glued to the steady flow of pedestrians blending into the night. For the past few weeks, they'd studied the place, its security, the guards' routines, even the commute of the janitors. They felt invincible. Just 3 minutes inside and those safe deposit boxes will be ours, Tommy added, rubbing his hands together in anticipation. He could almost feel the cold metal of the cash and jewels resting within reach. Danny said, suddenly serious. He had to exude confidence. Their future depended on it. As they crept closer to the bank's side entrance, the reality of their plan pressed down on their shoulders, heavy and palpable. They slipped in through the side door, a whisper of a sound as Danny pulled it open. The darkness enveloped them, a stark contrast to the icy glow of the street. Once inside, adrenaline washed over them. It felt like stepping through a portal into another world. The bank's interior was eerily quiet, the faint hum of machinery vibrating through the air. Rows of shiny black ATMs loomed before them like silent sentinels. But there was no time for marveling. The adrenaline of thievery urged them forward. "Danny, you take the back room," Liz urged, pointing towards a slightly ajar door. Tommy and Danny nodded, eager to get moving. Each one of them had been briefed on their roles for weeks, drilling it into their subconscious like a well-rehearsed dance. The plan felt bulletproof. Danny turned to the back room, heart pounding, hands sweaty against the cool metal of the doorknob. As he pushed it open, the faint scent of cleaning supplies wafted toward him. He stepped inside, the door creaking behind him as he scanned for the vault. Nothing seemed out of place, no alarms, no guards. For a fleeting moment, he believed they really could pull this off. They were, after all, the smart crew, or so they had told themselves. He hurried toward the back wall where the safe was housed. With every step, his confidence surged. He was on the brink of claiming victory. He felt like a king about to get crowned. Meanwhile, Liz's heart raced as she circled the security monitor, tapping buttons on the control panel. She had a knack for electronics, and in other circumstances, she might have relished the challenge of disabling the security system. But right now, a knot of worry twisted in her stomach. "Come on, work with me," she muttered, sweat beading on her forehead. She pulled up the camera feeds, anxiety pulsing through her chest as she observed their surroundings. There it was, the corner view of the front entrance, all clear. She quickly toggled to the back door feed. "Guys, you're clear," just get her voice cut off abruptly as static crackled from the speaker. The screens began to flicker before her eyes and the familiar panic surged back. "Liz," Danny shouted from the back room, but there was no answer. He yelled again, this time more insistently. With her mind racing, Liz realized something was off. The cameras weren't flickering, they were being replaced by something else. A sick sense of impending doom clogged her throat. What if they weren't outsmarting anyone? What if they were caught? "Guys," she finally gasped through deep breaths. But by now, Danny and Tommy were huddled around the vault, eyes wide and hopeful. Tommy said, urgency thick in his voice. Just as Danny prepared to input the combination they'd stolen, a blaring alarm erupted from the ceiling, drowning out their hopes. Lights spun wildly, bathing the room in frantic colors as a deafening voice echoed through the halls. "Security breach! Security breach!" Danny shouted, raw panic flooding his system. Suddenly, they weren't just 3 robbers in a heist. They were prey caught in a trap. The weight of their miscalculation crushed down on them, and Danny's sense of invincibility crumbled like a house of cards. "Get out!" he yelled, whirling toward the door, and the others followed. Liz sprinted towards them, breathless, confusion swirling in her eyes as they rushed through the labyrinth of the bank. Each footfall echoed like a metronome of their fading hopes. They reached the back door, but Tommy fumbled with the doorknob, trembling hands unable to turn it. "Come on," he cried out, panic streaming like electricity through his veins. Another guard stepped into view, the beam of his flashlight slicing through the dark. "Freeze!" The command sent a jolt through their bodies and time froze around them. "Don't think!" Danny bellowed, desperation leaping from his chest. He thrust his body against Tommy, sending them crashing through the door. They tumbled into a narrow hallway, scurrying between the walls as the guards closed in. The world outside felt like a distant dream. The blaring alarms and harsh shouts became a soundtrack of chaos as they fled. They spiraled to the left, hearts pounding, adrenaline fueling their every step. But in their panic, they didn't see the sharp corner that led them straight into the main lobby. Suddenly, They emerged in an open area where people were frozen in shock, patrons staring wide-eyed as they barreled past. Tommy shouted, his voice rising in disbelief over the din. Danny urged, eyes darting to the tall glass doors that glistened like a beacon of hope. The exit was just ahead, calling out like a siren. But then they saw the unmistakable sight of blue and red lights reflecting in the lobby windows, closing in on them. Danny reached for the door handle. It was locked. He screamed into the madness, desperation gnawing at the edges of his sanity. Liz replied, glancing back as the guards closed in. But Danny's mind was racing. Survival took precedence over reason. With a primal instinct, he slammed his shoulder into the glass door, but it held, or rather, it shattered. Glass exploded outward with a cascade of dazzling fragments, and in that instant of chaos, every one of their fates hung in the balance. They spilled onto the pavement, fresh air hitting their faces like a slap. Danny shouted, but confusion swirled around them like a tempest. They scattered into the night, a flurry of energy fueled by pure panic. As Danny ran, his breaths came faster, matching the rhythm of the sirens that filled the air. The streets blurred around him, shadows twisting under the streetlights. His mind raced. What went wrong? Or so they thought. Tommy veered left, slipping down a narrow alley, while Liz and Danny darted toward the parking lot. They splintered apart, each of them desperate to find safety. But even as they fled, a sickening feeling rooted itself in the pit of Danny's stomach. Had they truly thought they were smarter than everyone else? Turning a corner, he found himself in an empty parking lot. Heart racing, he crouched behind a parked car, peering around to see if anyone was pursuing. A voice crackled against the radio in his earpiece. It was Tommy, but the static drowned out clarity. Tommy's voice sounded strained, the fear echoing in his words. Danny's thoughts raced. We can't go back. Where? Suddenly, the sound of footsteps drew closer. The unmistakable clatter of boots on the pavement echoed ominously. Danny pressed himself harder against the car, adrenaline washing over him as he debated their next move. Tommy's words came through again, but this time they sounded frantic. Down that street. In an instant, the sense of security Danny clung to evaporated. The night turned stifling as each sound heightened the tension. Suddenly, the flashlight beams danced across the pavement, illuminating the space around him. Daniel, Liz's voice called out, distant yet urgent. But before he could respond, flashlight beams illuminated his hiding place. The officers had found him, a spotlight dancing over his body, drawing nearer. A voice commanded, but Danny was lost. Heart racing like a runaway train, he bolted around the car just as they lunged toward him, hands reaching out to grab him as he barreled down the alley. Adrenaline surged through him, carrying him farther into the night, but then, amidst the chaos, he heard it. The unmistakable sound of another alarm ringing. This one wasn't coming from the bank. It was a car alarm piercing through the night, reverberating into the chaos. He glanced over his shoulder, spotting Tommy at the other end of the alley, eyes wide with realization. Get in there, Danny shouted, sprinting toward the car with no idea who it belonged to. But time was slipping through their fingers like sand, and the sirens drew closer. They dove into the vehicle, hearts hammering as they fumbled with the locks. Just as they got inside, they heard voices of officers behind them, echoing through the night, their own breaths mingling with the chaos outside. In that moment, it felt like every decision made had come crashing down around them. Their plan had imploded spectacularly, leaving them with nothing but shadows of their mistakes. Were they smart, or had they merely been lucky? The ignition roared to life as Danny forced the key into the old car, praying it wouldn't stall. With officers closing in, he slammed the gear into drive, crashing the gas. As they thundered onto the street, the scene flipped into chaos. The police rushed after them, sirens screeching like demons in their wake. The world outside became a blur of lights and shadows, panic spiraling into their minds. Liz cried, gripping the door handle tightly. Danny's determination surged. They had let both their ambition and adrenaline cloud their judgment. But the night was far from over, and as they careened down the road, Danny felt a deep-seated unease settle within him. They were robbers who had thought they were smarter, but in that moment it was clear. They had played their own game, only to find themselves ensnared in their hubris. In the distance, the glimmer of police lights grew brighter, closing in on them like a vice. Each heartbeat echoed the weight of impending doom, forcing them to confront a truth they had been desperately avoiding. They had outplayed themselves, and the reckoning was just around the corner. Would they find a way out, or would they face a consequence too deep to ignore? As the city lights blurred into streaks of color, their sense of safety began to slip away, shadows chasing them into an uncertain night. The turning point was rising, and soon, fate would force them to reckon with choices made, tearing the fabric of their trust apart as the sirens sang their unrelenting song of justice.